My champagne glass was still in my hand when Victor smiled at the crowd and said there was more exciting news tonight. That sentence, those words, I can still hear the exact cadence of them. The warmth he put into it, the performer's timing, the way he paused just long enough to make everyone lean forward.
He was good at that.
Making people lean forward. It was one of the things I had loved about him. I was standing 6 feet away in my wedding dress. We had been married for 47 minutes.
He turned toward Naomi.
She was near the far end of the head table, and she had been crying for the last 20 minutes in the way she sometimes cried, dramatically, quietly, with the particular elegance of a woman who has practiced the expression. I had thought it was emotion. I had thought she was moved by the ceremony the way some people are moved by weddings, especially women who are themselves unhappy in their marriages. I had thought it was nothing. Victor said they were expecting twins. The room didn't explode. That's what I want you to understand. It didn't erupt. It didn't gasp. It didn't do any of the things a room does in movies when something terrible is announced. It went quiet. Completely, specifically quiet, the kind that is worse than noise because it means every single person in the room is doing the same calculation at the same moment and arriving at the same answer. The jazz band had just finished playing. Someone's champagne glass was being set down on a table and the sound of it carried across the whole room. I heard it clearly, that small sound in all that silence. I heard everything clearly in that silence. The air conditioning, a car somewhere in the parking lot outside, the sound of my own heartbeat, which was very loud and very steady, and which surprised me. I looked at Victor.
He was not looking at me.
And if you've ever ignored a red flag because you just wanted peace after years of hard living, subscribe to this channel right now. Because people our age know what loneliness does to good judgment. We know how much we want to believe in something. We know how easy it is to look away from the thing that's right in front of us when looking at it would cost us everything we were hoping for. Subscribe and stay with me because this story is just beginning and you need to be here for how it ends. I want to tell you about the 18 months before that evening because the announcement was not where the betrayal started. It was where it became impossible to ignore. I had been alone for 6 years when I met Victor. 6 years of learning to sleep without the radio on, of cooking for one, of understanding which kinds of quiet were bearable and which were the kind you had to walk around in your own apartment to escape. I am 59 years old, and I am not someone who needs to be in a relationship to function, but I am also someone who knows the difference between solitude and loneliness, and by the time Victor walked into my life at a mutual friend's dinner party in October, I had been lonely for long enough to recognize how much I had missed being known. He was charming in the way of men who have practiced it, warmth deployed at exactly the right moment, attention given so completely that you felt, for the duration of it, like the only person in the room. He called when he said he would call. He remembered details. He asked questions and listened to the answers. He made me feel, for the first time in a very long time, like I was being seen. I noticed Naomi early. Not with suspicion, just with the particular alertness of a woman who has lived long enough to recognize certain dynamics. The way she spoke to him at family gatherings slightly too familiar, leaning in slightly too close. A private joke here, a knowing look there. The way she touched his arm when making a point, which was more often than necessary. I told myself it was their family's warmth. I told myself I was reading into things. I told myself, and here is the part that still costs me something to say, that I wanted this enough to look past things I would have noticed in someone I cared less about losing. That is the thing about loneliness. It is not just absence. It is a constant pressure in the direction of believing the things you want to believe. Tell me in the comments, would you have walked out right there in the reception hall? Or would you have stayed long enough to understand what you were actually dealing with? I know a lot of good women who spent years swallowing humiliation because making a scene felt like losing. Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to know. The silence lasted longer than silences usually do at wedding receptions. Long enough for the woman at table 7 to set down her fork. Long enough for the photographer, who had been moving quietly around the room all evening, to lower his camera and stand completely still. Long enough for Victor's mother to stand up from her seat near the front, which she did with the swift purposefulness of a woman who has spent decades managing her son's consequences. She said, "This is not the time for drama." She said it to the room in general and to me in particular, which told me that she had known. That sentence, the speed of it, the prepared quality of it, was not the sentence of a woman who had just been surprised. It was the sentence of a woman who had been waiting to deploy it. I understood then that the betrayal was not just Victor and Naomi. It was the entire architecture of people who had known, in various degrees, and had chosen not to tell me. A whole family's worth of silence, maintained around me for months. I set my champagne glass down on the nearest table. I looked at Victor for a long moment. He was watching me now, the performer gone, something more uncertain underneath. He said my name.
He took a step toward me.
I said, very quietly, "How long?" He said it wasn't what it looked like. He said he had been trying to find the right time. He said he still loved me, and that none of this changed what we had, and that we could work through it, that families were complicated, that this was not the end of anything. I listened to all of it. I let him finish. And then I said, "How long?" And stay with me, because what I did next shocked that entire ballroom more than anything Victor had said. And I need you here for it. I turned to our wedding planner, a woman named Greta, who had been standing at the edge of the room with her clipboard and the specific wide-eyed expression of someone whose professional life has just gone entirely off script. I asked her if she had a pen. She looked at me for a moment and then reached into her jacket pocket and handed me one without a word. I had signed a prenuptial agreement 3 months earlier. It had been Victor's idea, actually. He had significant assets from his previous marriage and wanted to protect them, and I had agreed because I had significant assets of my own and because I believed at the time that we were two adults being careful and honest with each other. The agreement was with my attorney. But I had also brought, in my small handbag that was now on the head table, the paperwork my attorney had prepared as a contingency for a situation I had told her was theoretical. She had not argued with me. She had simply prepared the documents. She was a practical woman, and she had been doing family law for 30 years. I retrieved the envelope from my bag. I opened it. I placed the papers on the table, smoothed them flat, and I signed my name at the bottom with Greta's pen. The ballroom was entirely silent. I could hear my hand moving across the paper. I slid the papers toward Victor.
He looked at them.
Then he looked at me. Then he looked at the room, which was looking back at him, and I watched something happen on his face that I don't have a perfect word for. The collapse, maybe, of the story he had been telling himself about how this evening was going to go. If you enjoy stories where the quiet response speaks louder than screaming, subscribe right now. Because sometimes dignity is the most devastating thing you can deploy. And sometimes the quietest woman in the room is the one holding all the power. Subscribe and tell a friend, because people need to hear stories like this one. He said, "Celeste." I said, "You should start your family honestly this time." Then I turned and I walked toward the exit. The older women came first. That's what I remember, before anyone else moved, before the general collapse of the evening into its various difficult conversations. It was the older women. My friend Patricia from my book club, a woman named Bet, who had been a colleague of my mother's 30 years ago and who I had not expected to see cry at my wedding and did not expect to see cry at its ending, but who was crying. A woman I barely knew who had been seated at table 11 and who intercepted me in the hallway near the coat room and put both her hands over mine and said, "You handled that with more grace than he deserved." I thought about that on the drive home, about grace, and whether what I had done was grace or just the specific absence of screaming that happens when you are in shock so thorough that nothing loud is available. I don't know the answer.
Both, maybe.
I do know that walking out of that ballroom in my wedding dress with my head up was the first decision I had made that evening that was entirely mine. The weeks that followed were difficult in the way that the aftermath of things you didn't choose is always difficult. Not dramatic, just heavy. I took down the few decorations that had made it to my apartment. I made phone calls I didn't want to make. I had long conversations with my attorney, who was, as I've mentioned, a practical woman. I cried some, less than I expected, in the particular specific way you cry when what you're mourning is not just a marriage, but the version of the future you had been carrying around carefully for 18 months and have just had to set down. Victor called several times. I answered once and listened for 3 minutes and then said I needed to go and ended the call. His mother sent a letter that began with the word unfortunately and that I did not finish reading. Naomi's husband filed for divorce in September. I go to my book club on the second Tuesday of every month. I make coffee in the morning, and I drink it by the window where the light comes in at an angle in the fall that I find genuinely beautiful. I have been returning, slowly, to the particular kind of solitude that is chosen rather than imposed, the kind that has space in it, and quiet that doesn't press, and the specific piece of a life that belongs entirely to you. I lost something at that reception. I want to be honest about that. I lost something real that I had wanted and believed in, and that costs something even now. But I did not lose my dignity. He kept his performance, his excuses, his carefully staged evening of announcements. I kept my dignity. In the full accounting of that night, I believe I came out ahead. He thought he ruined my wedding day. What he actually did was save the rest of my life, by making it impossible to keep looking away from the thing I should have seen sooner, and by giving me the chance to respond to it in a way I could respect myself for, in a white dress, in front of 200 people with a borrowed pen, and everything I needed already in my hands. If this story touched something in you tonight, subscribe and come back tomorrow. Because sometimes the worst day of your life becomes the first honest day you've had in years. And the women who've lived through something like this, you know exactly what I mean. The quiet ones. The ones who stayed too long. The ones who finally walked out. You deserve to be heard.
Subscribe.
Come back. We're just getting started.